Hi, my name is Steve Hayes, and I've been asked by ABCT to answer some questions about my career as part of a project to get some of the senior people in ABCT to do so. There's a series of questions that have been asked, and only a brief period of time to answer them. So let me just proceed through them. Can you tell us about how you got interested in clinical psychology? Well, I was interested in psychology because it could combine basic science and interest in more humanistic areas, the kinds of things that are explored in literature and art, and frankly in some of the deeper and less empirical clinical traditions. And as a high school student, I actually looked at that. I was editing the literary magazine, involved in various kinds of artistic things, but also very much attracted to science and math and stuff. And I said, what field could combine that? One I could think of is psychology. Turned out to be a pretty good guess, and I've never looked back. Clinical psychology, just because I thought from that platform you would have freedom to go in all these possible directions of basic and applied, and to move it across the boundaries to biology or up into issues of sociology and social concern. I'm asked then, what were the most important influences on my career? The single biggest influence has to be B.F. Skinner. When I contacted him, I saw in his very basic work, and yet his interest even in utopian kinds of visions. Walden, too, is what made me a behaviorist as an old hippie. I mean, I used to have hair down here. I could look like it. Now I couldn't. But that, I thought, was just an amazing idea. Could you come up with principles that had such high precision and scope that you could take them up into issues of, what about your family life, or your organizations and work life, and how our society is arranged. As an undergraduate, I ran into a behaviorist, one of the earliest behaviorist therapists. This is 1960. Just a couple years after Behavior Research and Therapy starts, the first behavior therapy journal. Irv Kessler had got his PhD at University of Southern California in eye blink conditioning, and so by the time I'm a sophomore, which is 67, I'm literally sitting in and watching systematic desensitization sessions. Pretty amazing to see that whole arc. In graduate school, I was most strongly influenced at West Virginia University, I think, by the range of people there. I mean, some wonderful folks, Rob Hawkins and Hayne Reese and Andy Littell, people like that, sort of basic animal people, applied behavior analysts, more philosophically oriented cognitive people. But the two biggest one had to be my mentor, John Cohn, who is a graduate of the University of Washington and who brought that kind of early functional behavior analytic perspective, which he got from Alan Edwards, who got it from A.R. Gilliland, who was one of the first persons to take the spirit of the Chicago school. He got his degree at the University of Chicago, and Cantor was there, and Angel, and all those folks, to bring it into application. Wrote one of the earliest articles on law of effect, but did work on intelligence tests of infants and things like that. So John had a big influence on me. John Krapfel, also at West Virginia, did, in terms of bringing me in contact with the philosophical part of the work and Willard Day's work, which ended up having a big influence in me thinking about myself and my work in a functional, contextual way. My first job at University of North Carolina, Greensboro, Rosemary Nelson undoubtedly had the biggest influence on me, and just a wonderful behavior therapist. David Barlow on my internship, and to this day I occasionally do things with David. We've had books not too long ago together, and again, that combination, a very functional approach. His lineage goes all the way back to William James, actually. So those are the people who had the biggest influence. And I think the source that the bottom line of all that is that all these people together took a functional and contextual approach, which is in CBT, but is not dominant necessarily in CBT. What are your most important contributions to research and practice? Well, I think I'm known for being a behavioral type, and my work in the philosophy of science there, I call it functional contextualism. It's a rounding out and expansion of radical behaviorism, which is a horribly named position for this contextual psychology that Skinner helped create. And functional contextualism, I think, carries it forward. And on that, I built an analysis of language and cognition called relational frame theory, which, if I already guess, is probably my single most important intellectual achievement. If you go out over the next decades, it's really heavily involved now in language training, inside behavior analysis, and so forth, and is beginning to be applied in social cognition, implicit measures, and things of that kind. Acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, I'm probably best known for in this group, which is, I think, kind of an extension of that philosophy and set of basic principles, behavioral principles, and as expanded by RFT, really forms the foundation of ACT. Not in a point-to-point way, but they co-evolved together. My interest in evolution science has been expanding over the last 20 years. And especially with my colleague David Sloan Wilson, there's a number of pieces there trying to harmonize behavioral principles, RFT, and evolution science principles. More recently, I've been working hard on expanding that spirit into process-based CBT, or sometimes it's called PBT, process-based therapy, especially with my colleague Stefan Hoffman, who is very well known to this group, and who has the same kind of functional, contextual spirit, despite the fact that he's more closely identified with Beck and that wing of CBT. We found a real alliance there in coming together and trying to create a positive vision for the future of evidence-based care. How can we do a better job of disseminating CBT to clinicians? I hate the word dissemination. I hate it. Dissemination sounds like we've got something and we've got to put it in you. It's even in the root of the word. I haven't looked it up, but it's probably that semination. You probably know what the root of that is. And instead, I think what we need is participation and empowerment. And you don't get that by telling people what to do or by showing them that you have the right answers. This is just arrogant stuff, mostly from scientists, to be honest. They think they have the capital T truth. Well, they don't. I mean, I know some research-oriented CBT people who can do therapy to fight their way out of a paper bag, and that's not where we should be. We have done actually some research on this, and here's my view on this. If you want to reach people, you need to, and last I checked, therapists are people. If you want to reach them, you have to sort of take them where they are. You have to listen, take their perspective. You have to make sure that they know that you're safe and you're on their side. You have to touch their heart and lift them up. And if you do all that, you get a chance to touch their head and change what they do with their hands. And if you do all that, and it turns out that then they can do more of what they came to do, they will stick with you. And so arrogance is out, humility is in, and let's start with the head. Start with the heart. Move to the head and hands only in the service of evidence-based care that serves the lives of the people that we're working with. So people have looked at that strategy, and it is a strategy. We've actually done research on some of these elements. And in the CBT universe, I sometimes get rolling eyes and people using the C word, act as a cult and things like that, which is unfair. It's nonsense. And meanwhile, ACT and CBS, Contextual Behavioral Science, which is my name, by the way, for all those collections of things I talked about earlier, is spreading around the globe. I mean, the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science is a bigger society than ABCT. and I think arguably more of a global impact. I'm sorry if that sounds arrogant. And it's because we've developed that way, hardcore science values. And even things you don't see in the ABCT world, like a really serious interest in basic principles and even developing the basic science at the kind of basic science that could publish in the most basic experimental journals. I don't mean just sort of modeling things in the lab or doing component analyses. If you bring all of that together with this kind of personal connection with the interests and needs of clinicians, not just in their work, not just in their professional role, but also as human beings, that's a formula for dissemination, and I think you've seen that in the explosion of interest in ACT-RFT and CBS. What do you believe are the biggest challenges facing clinical science? The historical challenge is one of irrelevance. I just don't think we're doing a very good job of the previous thing I just answered, which is to win the hearts and minds of people who are responsible for delivering care. And I think it's because we've had the wrong strategy. To some degree, it's also because we haven't been deep enough in terms of what we're doing. I think CBT has a way to go yet to evolve. I think the third wave helped. It really steps us forward. But it begins to stretch the underlying model in a way that isn't that CBT anymore. If you're doing mindfulness work and compassion work and so forth, well, it's evidence-based, but it might not be a classic CBT. So irrelevance is one. I don't mean that we don't have something to contribute, but we really have to find a way to make that happen. The other one is overcoming the DSM. We bought into, first we resisted. When I say we, ABCT resisted the DSM strongly. We didn't buy into the idea that signs and symptoms alone would lead to functional understanding. It could, we thought it might, but we didn't really buy into that. But between the NIMH and APA and the third-party payers, we were willing to go along. You might say we were bought off. But the good part of it is we had a huge expanse of research and practice in CBT. But that thing is clearly, reached its asymptote. I mean, people are exhausted with the DSM. Psychiatry is no longer really very interested in it. I don't think categorizing mental health problems into little cubby holes and so forth is a way to go. And we are now so deep into it that when you say CBT and evidence-based therapy, people are thinking protocols for syndromes. It's a tragedy that it's stuck to us because that's not where we started. That's not really true to our traditions. It's just where we ended up. But let's see if we can get past that. And if we do that really well, I think we will increase our relevance, not just because our science will be more relevant, but also because the way that we reach people will be more empowering. What are the recent findings about psychopathology and mental health that are likely to have the greatest impact on future research and practice? If I had to pick one, I'd pick epigenetics. I think we're part of the natural science tradition. We're part of the functional contextual tradition inside behavior therapy and CBT. And being able to bring the environment behavior over into the life sciences and even the development of phenotypes that are driven by genetic development. Turns out epigenetics is a huge component of that. Cells are systems for turning environment and behavior into biology. And we are really the drivers of evolution. So I don't think we're not too far away from taking oral swabs and doing epigenetic tests to see whether or not psychotherapy is working, even within a single person that we're working with. I don't think it'll even just be pre-post. It'll be help to guide the clinicians as we begin to realize how entire genetic networks are turned on and off by environment behavior, including therapy. What changes we'd like to see in graduate education? I think we did a really good job, we meaning ABCT, in the task force, the multi-organizational task force, to answer that question. And then it's been almost silent. I mean, I don't know why, but ABCT, et cetera, have not really banged the drums very well. But until recently, and actually Stefan and I are really focusing the work on this, because basically what that task force said is focus on these more competencies that are linked to processes, teach people the philosophical assumptions that they're bringing to bear, and the kind of analytic strategies to make use of a more process-based approach. And let's get out of this protocols for syndromes and era. We agree. And that's what we got to do. So how do you see CBT evolving in the next 10 years? If it does what it came to do, it's going to become more and more the face of evidence-based therapy, but not because evidence-based therapy will be branded and will look like CBT, but because I think as you expand things out and you understand what these underlying processes are, the simple models that underlie CBT are falling away, and we're ending up with a multidimensional, multi-level, process-based approach to understanding human complexity that would fit not just with psychotherapy, but behavior change more generally, and is well positioned, I believe, under the umbrella of modern-day extended evolutionary synthesis kind of approach of multi-level, multi-dimensional evolutionary processes. So I see CBT evolving in a process-based therapy direction, and Stefan and my text and the articles we have coming out lay out where we're trying to take that. What areas or issues do you feel CBT needs to address more in the future? Well, I think it needs to get beyond this protocol phase, but it also should start waking up to the fact that the things that we're dealing with in the clinic and in our so-called psychotherapy work apply to social justice, stigmatization, prejudice, apply to organizations, to societal concerns. And so, we have to get out of thinking of what we're doing in therapy as just being therapy with a capital T for mental illness with a capital I. We're in the business of promoting the prosperity of human beings, and ameliorating their problems is part of that process, yes. But mental illness, really? Illness? Where did that come from? It has created so much mischief for people and led to the incredible level of over-medication that we have. And I think we won't be heard until people begin to see us as the part of the applied face of behavioral science more generally, and part of that of life science more generally, and thus the interest in nesting us under evolution science. How has membership in ABCT impacted your career? Well, hugely. I mean, I'm involved in ABCT really strongly since the 70s, and been president and all that kind of stuff, of course, but all these other kind of roles. It has shown me the power of evidence-based therapy as an opening to a larger agenda of how do we position behavioral science, both basic and applied, inside the society in a way that human beings who pay for our salaries, after all, and pay for all this research, can benefit personally in their lives, including those human beings we call therapists, not just in the work they do, but also in their own sense of personal accomplishment, burnout, and so on. So I'm very thankful to ABCT for helping me on the therapy side, both in terms of skill development, but also seeing the potential, but also in that helping me to find, I think, some ways into this larger mission that I think we came to accomplish. The way the ACBS crew, the contextual behavioral science crew, says it, I think it applies as well to ABCT at its best, that our job is to create a psychology more worthy of the challenge of the human condition. I hope this 20 minutes was helpful to young people, and maybe they can be part of the process of creating just that, because that's a long process. We'll check back in 100 years or two and see how you did. Good luck.